When I pulled into my driveway that Tuesday afternoon, I never expected to find 3 workers hammering thick metal posts into my property line. Watching over them like a general overseeing her troops was Barbara Watson, our power-hungry HOA president. I stepped out, still in my suit from the state capitol, and walked straight to her. "Barbara, what's going on?" She turned with that fake smile she wore whenever she was up to no good. "Senator Williams, we're just installing necessary security measures. Your campaign signs have been disruptive." I looked at the row of metal posts stretching across my driveway. Tall, industrial, nothing like the decorative fencing allowed by HOA rules. I checked the bylaws. "My signs are within regulation," I said. Barbara pulled out a stack of papers from her designer purse, waving them like a fan. "The board had an emergency meeting last night. No political advertising is allowed. Lower property values." A neighbor, Tom, ran over, shouting, "Mark, they're doing this to my house too." I pulled out my phone, snapping pictures. The workers had no company logos, and their truck was unmarked. "I'll need to see permits." Barbara's smile twitched. "All paperwork is in order. We wouldn't want accidents happening because your driveway isn't properly secured." The way she said accidents made my skin crawl. Then Tom touched one of the metal posts and yanked his hand back. "These are electrical conduit mounts. They're not just putting up a fence." That night, I checked my security cameras. At 2 a.m., a man in dark clothes snuck into my yard, threading thick black wires through the posts. They were planning to electrify the fence. I called my contact at the city planning office. "Mike, check if there's a permit for fencing on my property." 10 minutes later, he called back. Nothing. Not even an application. I dug through the HOA bylaws Barbara had sent out last week. 500 pages of rules she thought no one would read. On page 342, all permanent structures require approval from neighboring properties. Barbara hadn't asked a single neighbor. At 4 a.m., my cameras caught Barbara creeping along my property line, touching each post like she was inspecting them. Then she pulled out a voltage meter from her purse. I needed more proof. I installed extra cameras, set up alerts, and pulled up Barbara's social media. Buried in her old posts were pictures of her at my opponent's fundraising dinners. She'd even donated to his campaign. The pieces started to fit, but I needed something bigger. That's when my neighbor Sarah, a local reporter, knocked on my door. "Mark, I pulled up city records on Barbara's HOA meetings. You won't believe what I found." Sarah handed me a folder. "Barbara's been running secret emergency meetings, changing rules without votes. But it gets worse. Every HOA-mandated service, lawn care, security, cleaning, traces back to her son's company." Tom, an accountant, pulled up HOA financial records. "These numbers don't match the fees we've paid. Half of it disappears into administrative costs." Then my security camera pinged. Barbara stood by the fence, talking to a man in a black SUV. He handed her a thick envelope. "That's James Anderson's campaign manager," Sarah whispered. "Your opponent. We weren't just dealing with a corrupt HOA president. This was political sabotage." Barbara called an emergency HOA meeting. She tried to force a vote to ban me from the neighborhood. "Your fence is illegal," I said, standing before the packed room. "Crosses my property line. No permits filed." Gasps. Murmurs. I held up documents from City Hall. Installing an electric fence without permits isn't just against HOA rules, it's a crime. Barbara's mask cracked. "You're just another entitled politician who thinks rules don't apply to him." I smiled. "Funny you mention rules. Would you like to explain why HOA fees are being funneled into a company owned by my opponent's campaign manager?" Dead silence. "That's a lie," Barbara shouted. "You have no proof." I pulled out my phone. "Actually, I do. I played the security footage." Barbara's voice rang through the room. "Once we push him out, the developer's offer is guaranteed. No politician is stopping our plans for this neighborhood." Chaos erupted. Neighbors screamed, "You stole from us. You raised fees for this." Barbara lost control. "You think you can take me down? I run this neighborhood. I decide who lives here." 2 men in suits stood in the back. I turned to them. "Agents, do you need to hear more?" FBI badges flashed. Barbara's son tried sneaking out with files. "Oh, and agents," I said. "You might want to stop Kevin before he destroys evidence." Barbara and her board were arrested. Fraud, wire fraud, illegal campaign contributions, The list went on. The FBI found thousands of documents proving she'd been stealing from homeowners for years. She'd used HOA money to fund attack ads against me. The electric fence? A last-ditch effort to force me out before I could uncover the truth. The HOA was dissolved. Tom and Sarah took over, turning the old HOA office into a community center. Barbara tried selling her house, but no one wanted to live in the home of an infamous scam artist. She left town in disgrace. Meanwhile, my campaign took off. The news ran the story for weeks. People across the state shared their own HOA horror stories. A month later, a new law was passed, the Barbara Bill. No HOA could install security measures without full community approval. The morning after my victory speech, I drove past the empty lot where that electric fence once stood. Barbara wanted to push me out. Instead, she launched my career. The war was over, and I had won.